I'm Dina. Welcome to the Grim Curriculum.
Hello. You know what's a fun fact?
What's that?
As of today's episode releasing, it'll be releasing on 420.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, for the stoners out there.
Wow, stoners? Who does that? Well, I just dropped my bottle. That's how it knows I lied.
Yeah, we don't be doing the
No.
pot. Drugs are for bugs, kids.
Don't inject the marijuanas. Anyways, let's get to it.
Yeah, let's dive into it. I was trying to be happy before we get into it. There's really no point.
There's no happiness here.
There's really no point.
But before we get started, I want to share something with you that I just found out that kind of blew my mind. Okay, so did you know that the house where the Tate murders happened, it was torn down in 1994?
Okay.
But before it was torn down, it was purchased by Trent Reznor
Whoa.
of Nine Inch Nails.
Yeah.
Marilyn Manson recorded the part of the album Portrait of an American Family there.
That does track for Marilyn Manson.
It does. That being said, Trent Reznor would grow to regret his decision very quickly when he, by a just chance, ran into Sharon Tate's sister.
Whoa.
And I've got a quote for him here, and I would like you to share it if you don't mind.
Okay, all right. So he says, while I was working on Downward Spiral, I was living in the house where Sharon Tate was killed. Then one day, I met her sister. It was a random thing, just a brief encounter. And she said, "Are you exploiting my sister's death by living in her house?" For the first time, the whole thing kind of slapped me in the face. I said, "No, it's just sort of my own interest in American folklore. I'm in this place where a weird part of history occurred. I guess it never really struck me before, but it did then. She lost her sister from a senseless, ignorant situation that I don't want to support. When she was talking to me, I realized for the first time, what if it was my sister? I thought, fuck Charlie Manson. I don't want to be looked at as this guy who supports serial killer bullshit." I went home and cried that night. It made me see there's another side to things, you know? It's one thing to go around with your dick swinging in the wind, acting like it doesn't matter. But when you understand the repercussions that are felt, that's what sobered me up. Realizing that what balances out the appeal of the lawlessness and the lack of morality and that whole thing is the other end of it, and the victims who don't deserve that. Whoa.
Isn't that interesting? We've talked about murder houses so many times before on the podcast, and I really don't support the idea of buying a house that something terrible happened in because you think it's cool. And this showed a different side of it to me, and that just harsh reality of what you're actually doing when you're encountered by someone who was very deeply affected by this.
Yes, absolutely. To do something like that, to buy a house that a horrific thing happened in, is one thing. Life moves on, houses get sold, as we know.
Mm-hmm.
But to be in it for the reason that it's infamous makes me feel pretty icky.
That's gross.
It's like, what are you, an edgelord?
Right?
Get away. That's why I said it makes total sense that Marilyn Manson would be all over that.
Oh, he named himself after Charles Manson. Come on.
Exactly. And as we know, not the greatest guy on human history, or in human history.
Not a cool dude.
I'm glad that Trent Reznor had that kind of wake-up call to be like, okay, yeah, we're doing some fucked up shit, and that's not cool.
Yeah, wait a minute. Maybe I shouldn't have done that.
It makes it worth it to speak to people who have a different perspective on things.
Yes, absolutely.
You're not always going to agree with people, right? Like, you know, not everyone is going to have the same cup of tea as you, but sometimes it requires a wake-up call, and I'm glad he got it.
Yeah, I found that kind of last minute, and I wanted to throw that in because I thought it was a neat little tidbit and just an interesting perspective on the whole, like, murder house thing.
Well, and we talk about how many people that this has affected.
Yeah.
And again, to continue affecting people years and years after the fact. Crazy.
All right. He also fully supported the house being torn down, and the final owner made sure that nothing remained of the house. And then he built an 18,000 square foot house on the property in its place.
Fair enough.
And changed the address.
Fair enough. And we saw that with, like, the Amityville house. It happens more frequently than not. And they get blocked on Google Maps and things like that. Like, you can't go see them. But, all right. Fun, not so fun fact.
Yes, we're full of those.
All right, let's get into it.
So we've made it to part 5 of our Manson series.
And last week was a tough one, I think, wasn't it?
It really was. We got some feedback from you guys, and it seems like you all agreed with us. However, it's not going to get any easier from here on out at all. And honestly, we've gotten a lot of positive feedback, and we do appreciate that you've all enjoyed the series so far, despite how horrific and nightmarish it's been.
Yeah, after this, we are going to be going back to some of our regular kind of shorter 1 to 2 part episode series. If you do have any topics that you want us to cover in the future, of course, you can reach out to us on the socials or email us at thegrimcurriculum@gmail.com.
Today, we're going to be covering the second murder spree conducted by the Manson family, as well as their eventual downfall.
We last left off with Charles Manson visiting the home where the members of the group murdered Sharon Tate, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and Stephen Parent. He attempted to clean up some of the DNA that would link them to the murders in an effort to sway investigators, thinking that it would be linked to the Hinman murders.
There are a lot of people out there who believe that Charles Manson is innocent.
Okay.
Yeah, and honestly, if you don't believe me, go look at our YouTube comments anytime we post a video of him. There's constantly people being like, he was innocent, he was a plant, blah, blah, blah. Like we said before, he was not present at these murders, but they wouldn't have happened without him. And if you didn't think that after last week's episode, you are hopefully going to see he was guilty as shit by the end of this one.
Even Manson himself admitted that the things that happened those 2 nights would not have happened without his interference, basically.
Exactly.
He says that. So I don't know how you can look at this whole story and be like, nah, he didn't. He wasn't responsible.
Yeah, they did it without him.
Wild. One of the first things to point out about the LaBianca murders is that while they are tragic, along with everything else, they're not nearly as talked about as the Tate murders. For starters, the LaBiancas weren't well known. They were quite wealthy, yes, but it almost seems like their story gets glossed over a lot of the time when the Manson murders are talked about.
We'd like to take a moment to talk about who they were, starting with Leno, whose legal name was Pasqualino Antonio LaBianca. He had turned 44 years old only 4 days prior to his death. He was born to Italian-American immigrant parents who had ties to the grocery industry.
He served in World War II, and after he returned, he married his high school sweetheart. Together, they would have 3 children, but the couple divorced in 1955.
As for Rosemary, some of the details of her early life are muddled. She was most likely born in Mexico, but was raised in an orphanage in Arizona. At the age of 12, she was adopted by a couple in California.
She was a very inspirational person. She essentially came from nothing and was able to become a very successful and well-respected woman.
Like Leno, Rosemary had been married before and had 2 children with her ex-husband. The two met and married sometime in 1960.
By 1969, the two had enjoyed a happy life together with their blended family. Divorce was becoming more commonplace, and the concept of a family like theirs was no longer a rarity. Both of them got along with their stepchildren. In an interview, Louise LaBianca would later refer to Rosemary as a beautiful soul.
The house that they lived in was actually originally owned by Leno's father. Not only would he die in the home, he was actually born in it too.
Together, the two had made quite the life for themselves. Leno owned and operated a grocery store, while Rosemary ran a business of her own in the fashion industry.
The day before the murders, the couple had enjoyed a wonderful day with Rosemary's children, Frank and Susan, at Lake Isabella. Frank had decided he was going to stay an extra day with some friends, while Susan rode home with her parents.
They dropped her off at her apartment and stopped at a gas station where they were considered regulars. They also stopped at a newsstand across the street that was owned by John Focchiano, who was familiar with them as well. There, they found a copy of the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner with a headline that shocked them. The killings were now being reported all over the country.
I was able to find a bunch of the original news articles that were written and like the headlines. Something to note is they were automatically considered to be ritualistic killings, like straight off the bat. One of them even linked Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski to the occult directly, her because of her role in Eye of the Devil, and him because he made the film Rosemary's Baby, which is about a woman being impregnated by the devil.
I could see where that connection was made, especially because it would be so inflammatory
Oh
in
my
the
goodness,
media.
yeah, and it's so sensationalist.
Very much so. Leno chatted with John about the murders, and by the time they had arrived at the newsstand, it was quite late. It would be reported that they left sometime between 1 and 2 a.m. John would later recall that Rosemary had seemed truly haunted by what she had read.
Which, can you blame her, like, after seeing that?
Well, especially when it's pretty close to home that it's
Yes,
happening, right?
absolutely. A lot of wild stuff was happening around that time, especially regarding murders and serial killers, as we know. But to hear about something like this happening, that's going to shock anyone. Because think about if you were seeing that for yourself.
Oh,
Like, you would
yeah.
be mind boggled that something like this could happen. Not only were the victims well known, one of them was heavily pregnant. And that would shock anyone. But I'm sure as a mother, that hit her even harder.
Oh, absolutely. Something that often gets overlooked is that Rosemary had a fear that something terrible could possibly happen long before she heard about what had happened on Cielo Drive. For months leading up to their own deaths, the couple reported strange things happening in their home.
We have no reason to believe that these things were linked to the Manson family, but it truly is questionable. For instance, Rosemary had sent a letter to Leno's daughter talking about feeling unsafe in their neighborhood. She would say,
We haven't had any robberies, but every time I come home, I expect to find someone in the house or something missing.
and she had good reason to believe that. They reported strange occurrences to the police, such as items in the home being moved while they were gone, and on multiple occasions, they left their dogs in the home and they would come home and they'd be outside. And here's what's really weird about that is before the murders happened, Sharon Tate had a dream where
Yes.
she woke up in the dream and there was a man standing at her bed. And when you hear her description of the man, it sounds like Charles Manson.
Oh, that's creepy. I don't like that. On August 10th, 1969, Leslie Van Houten, Steve Grogan, Susan Atkins, Tex Watson, Linda Kasabian, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Charles Manson loaded themselves up into a car and went on their way.
The reason Charles went with them this time was because he was pretty upset at how the events of the prior night had gone down. Like we mentioned last week, he was mostly upset that they had killed such well known and wealthy people without getting anything out of it, specifically drugs or money.
The group drove around for a few hours debating on where they would strike next. In Manson, in his own words, Charles talks about how they pulled up to a house that belonged to someone they had partied with in the past. The group recognized the house and asked if that's where they were going. Charles said it wasn't and that he was thinking about the house across the street. He then walked towards 3301 Waverly Drive.
Alone, he went up to the driveway and found a window. Looking through it, he saw a man sitting on the couch who had fallen asleep reading a newspaper. Leno had planned to join Rosemary in bed, but he hadn't made it that far that night.
By some accounts, Charles returned to Tex and Patricia to tell them that this was the house he had chose for them. However, in Tex's autobiography, he states that the men went in alone. And for the record, Charles states the same thing in his book, so we will be sticking with that version of events.
I dislike Tex Watson so much that at this point he could say the sky was blue and I wouldn't believe him.
He just seems like such an idiot.
He's a greaseball.
He's just a big, dumb thug that was along for the ride and did everything Charlie Boy said.
I feel like all of these are clearly bad people. They've done terrible things. They're going to do worse. But he is someone who just his online presence
Yes.
makes me want to throw up in my mouth.
Yes, if you're going to be a bad, shitty person and do bad, shitty things, then take responsibility for it.
Yeah.
I can't stand the whole, like, holier than thou righteousness after the fact.
Oh, that pisses me right off.
During the trial, Tex Watson would actually say that he preferred Patricia's version because it made him look less responsible.
There you go.
Fucking asshole.
Charles had a gun with him while Tex carried a knife. The two made their way to the back door of the house and saw that it was unlocked. As they walked in, they were greeted by one of the dogs who happily went up to them and licked their hands.
Okay, this is one of my fears, is that someone breaks into our house and hurts my dog. Because you could come in for me and I would go down fighting, but you know Buffy would be like, "Hi, friend."
Right?
Ugh. He made his way up to the still asleep Leno and nudged him with the gun. Leno opened his eyes and was obviously very shocked. He began to panic, asking who Charles was and why he was there, to which Charles replied,
"We're not going to hurt you. Just be cool. Don't be afraid."
Charles asked Leno if anyone else was in the house, to which he said his wife was sleeping in bed, and he asked them not to wake her. He promised he would give them everything they had.
He then had Tex tie up Leno and went upstairs to get Rosemary. She was fast asleep. Charles pulled the covers off her and woke her up with the words,
"Wake up, lady, you got company."
He then told her that they were just going to rob them. And don't hear this and think that he didn't have the intention to murder them that night. They went in with the full idea to kill them. They told them this to keep them from panicking because at the Tate house, when they said, "I'm the devil and I'm here to do the devil's work," everyone freaked out and they didn't want to risk anyone fighting back like they had at the prior house.
Oh, man. Tex gathered the money. When he returned, Charles was upset to see him with less than $100. Leno told him that it was all that they had in the house, but offered to take them to his grocery store where they could take everything there as long as no one got hurt.
Rosemary was tied up in the bedroom while her husband was confined to the living room. Pillowcases were placed on their heads and tied with cords from nearby lamps.
Charles then left. On his way out, he sent Patricia and Leslie into the house and told them that the couple had to die. Linda Kasabian played the role of getaway driver. He gave her Rosemary's wallet and instructed her to drop it in a predominantly black neighborhood.
Prosecution would later report that the intention was for a person of color to find it, use their credit cards, and be blamed for the murders.
It makes me so angry that he leaves.
Yeah.
Like, you little coward.
Oh, yeah.
You're setting it all up and you're giving the orders, and then you can't even stand there while it happens. You leave the house.
Meanwhile, he tells Tex, make sure all of the girls are stabbing them so they all get in trouble just in case. So they're all involved.
Ugh. Back at the house, Leno began to panic. A struggle ensued, which led to Tex Watson stabbing him in the neck with a bayonet. As he continued to assault the man, Leno cried for his life. His final words, similar to those of Abigail Folger, were,
"I'm dead. I'm dead."
The knife that he was stabbed with was left in his throat. This would become very important later.
Still upstairs and tied up, Rosemary heard the commotion downstairs, which sent her into a panic. She began to fight back against the women. Leslie went downstairs and grabbed various kitchen tools, including some knives. When she came back up, Rosemary was pleading for her life and saying that they could have whatever they wanted.
She also swore to them that she wouldn't call the police, which then proved to be a fatal mistake. Leslie Van Houten would later say that the more she said the word police, the more she panicked and the less she wanted her alive as a witness.
She held her down while Patricia stabbed her repeatedly in the stomach until the knife bent. This caused the women to panic even more, and they began to scream to Tex to help them. Tex handed Leslie a different knife, and she began to stab her in the lower part of her torso.
When all was said and done, Rosemary LaBianca had been stabbed a total of 41 times. Patricia then made her way to the body of Leno and carved the word war into his chest. She then grabbed a nearby fork and stabbed him in the stomach. Using the blood from the wound, she wrote the words "rise" and "death to pigs" on the wall.
She also wrote the words "Helter Skelter" on the door of the refrigerator.
Yeah, she spelt it wrong.
You had one job.
One job. And let's get real, the words helter skelter, not hard to spell.
No, and they've heard it a million times before. Like, it's their, motto, basically, at this point. But no, she can't spell it.
I guess the thing to reiterate at this point is they were on hella drugs
still. Yeah, for sure.
They didn't sober up for this one.
They have not come down at all.
Not at all.
They then showered in the home and spent some time petting and playing with the dogs in the house before they left. So don't worry, Charlotte, the dogs were not harmed.
I'm glad they weren't, but, don't touch their dogs.
Leave the dogs alone. Leave everybody alone.
Oh, my God. As for the wallet, Linda apparently didn't quite understand the assignment that Charles had given her. She left it in the toilet tank in a gas station bathroom where it wouldn't be found for almost half a year.
And the gas station was also in a predominantly white neighborhood.
So she got it all fucking wrong.
Oh, yeah, they all did.
The group had actually intended to perform a double hit that night. Charles instructed Linda to get them to the house of a semi-famous acquaintance of hers. When they arrived, she deliberately knocked on the wrong door, which led them to changing their minds on the murder.
Not before Susan Atkins took a poop in the stairwell.
What is wrong with you people?
I wanted to include that fact for a specific reason. I still see a lot of admiration for these people online, which is revolting. They're losers. They're losers who shit in staircases.
Absolutely. They're just drug-addled menaces to society
Yep.
who had no responsibility whatsoever. On August 9th, the housekeeper who worked at the Tate house arrived to work and discovered the brutal scene. The following day, detectives working the Hinman case informed the LAPD that the writing found there was similar to what they had found. However, the Tate team ignored the similarities because they just assumed that it was a drug-related murder.
The bodies of the LaBiancas would tragically be found by their children the day after they were killed. Leno was on the living room floor with his face still covered by the pillowcase and his hands bound behind his back.
It was specifically 15-year-old Frank who first arrived on the scene after returning from his camping trip. He saw the condition of the front door and called his sister and her boyfriend, who went into the home and saw what had happened.
Rosemary was found on the bedroom floor with her dress completely over her head, which exposed her body in one final act of humiliation.
That's awful. And we see that a lot with serial killers. In order to make the scene that will be found as shocking as possible, they will leave their victims in grotesque and really compromised manners, because the poor unfortunate soul that gets to see that is then more so traumatized by the entire act. Within the span of 24 hours, 7 of the most brutal murders in Los Angeles history had been committed, and people were rightfully terrified.
Initially, the LaBianca murders were thought to be a mob hit. Apparently, Leno was an avid gambler who owned 9 racehorses and was spending around $500 a day betting on them. He also had approximately $230,000 in debt, and it was thought that perhaps a loan shark had killed them.
This theory was disproved when they saw Rosemary had quite a bit of money, and the couple could have easily paid it off. He probably just wasn't telling her.
Yeah, I don't think she knew. It wasn't long before the police concluded that the knife left in Leno LaBianca's throat had been used in the Tate murders. And another quick little side note here, I found this while looking into their murders. Apparently in 2020, their granddaughter, who was 40 at the time, was also murdered in a very horrific way.
God.
This was the daughter of Susan. So Susan lost a total of 3 people decades apart in an absolutely horrific way.
Oh my God. Why does the fucking baddest things happen to like nice people?
Right? Yeah, that's so sad.
One of the main suspects at that time was someone we briefly mentioned last week, William Garrettson. He lived at the guest house on the Tate property and was the person that Stephen Parent was there visiting. He was held briefly but was released on August 11.
He doesn't get talked about a lot, so I did some digging, and apparently he says he slept through the whole thing.
Whoa!
Which to me is shocking. This is according to a 1969 article from the Sunday People, and he was subjected to a polygraph test, which we know, not the most reliable, I don't know, but he claimed that he did not hear a single thing.
It's possible. He's could absolutely be telling the truth. However, we talked about this last week. Some girl guides or whatever were having a camping trip not that far away, and they heard the screams.
Honestly, this is completely speculation, so don't quote me on this. I think the only way that could be true, which is likely, is he was drunk or stoned out of his mind and completely blacked out.
Possible. Very possible.
Like, just judging by the time and all of that, I think maybe, but that's the only way I could see that being a thing, because how do you sleep through that?
I have no idea. But like you say, drugs, alcohol. It seems strange that his friend came to visit, but he was completely passed out at the time. Wouldn't you be awake for your friend coming to visit?
Well, so Stephen Parent was going to sell him this radio, right?
Yes.
And then William Garrettson was like, I don't want the radio. And so they like hung out for a little bit. Stephen Parent left and was murdered on his way out. So just because he happened to come to the gate as they did too.
Yeah.
But I have a really hard time understanding how you could sleep through that. But what do I know? I wasn't there.
Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the family had been divided into 2 groups, those who knew about the murders and those who didn't. About this, Charles would say,
that started a little wave of, what's going on that I don't know about? Why aren't I included? Are they talking about me? Some complexes started showing. I wasn't fond of the situation, but how the hell can a guy blurt out to 25 or 30 kids, hey, don't feel like you're being left out of anything. All those girls are whispering about has nothing to do with you. It's just that 8 people are dead and the rest of you aren't supposed to know about it. And he said 8 because he still thinks that lots of Papa's dead.
Oh, yeah, lots of Papa is not dead.
No, he out there.
All of this left Charles feeling incredibly paranoid. He spent a lot of his time looking down the road, waiting for police to show up at any moment. Days and days went by, and when the police didn't show, he finally relaxed a little bit. He prioritized getting the group ready to leave the ranch. However, they would never get that chance.
He woke up on August 16th to commotion all around him. He was laying in bed with Stephanie when he heard helicopters and police yelling that they were arresting people. Without a second thought for the woman in his bed, he grabbed his clothes and took off out the back door. He dove under the porch and laid in the dirt as they arrested members of the family.
He would later say that it seemed to him like they knew where all of their hiding spots were, which led him to believe that they had been ratted out by one of their own. He was pulled out from under the porch and subsequently arrested.
One thing that he points out was the difference in reaction from various family members, because those involved in the murders, they looked very serious and very scared as they were being arrested, and those that weren't involved in the murders, they were laughing, they thought it was funny, they were like, whatever,
like, hey man, we're just a bunch of stoned hippies,
yeah,
like, what's
exactly.
your problem? Once the entire group was arrested, the police officers read them their rights. Those present for the murders were shocked and relieved when only the words auto theft were mentioned.
So much so that some of them actually started to laugh.
They were all taken into custody, but the charges were dropped 2 days later due to an invalid search warrant. Ooh, I bet you someone got a real good talking to from their chief.
They put the wrong date on it.
Guys.
Yep.
Little admin mistakes make a big difference. Yeah, sometimes.
You gotta double check that stuff. It's important. Charles once again was laying in bed a couple days later with Stephanie when the police arrested him. This time, he was taken in on drug charges while Stephanie was arrested for indecent exposure due to the fact that she was sleeping in the nude.
Hey, wait a second.
I know! I was like, wait! That's not good.
I was gonna say, I have slept in the nude from time to time. I'm not afraid to admit it.
Right?
We're all adults here.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was a problem, especially in California.
You are exposing yourself to me, sir.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, you avert your eyes, my good man.
I think they just, like, needed anything to take them down, and they were like, boobs.
She showed herself to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my god. But that all being said, again, these charges were dropped. We're gonna see this happen a lot.
All of this convinced Charles even more that someone in his circle was conspiring against them. He concluded that it was none other than Shorty Shea.
So Shea was a stuntman who had been hanging out with the family for quite some time. However, in the months leading up to all of this, he seemed less and less happy with the goings-on at Spawn Ranch. When George Spawn began seriously talking about selling the ranch, Shea got close with the new owners. In Manson, in his own words, Charles writes,
he told me, it's all over for you, Charlie, when the new owners take over. They've already told me they don't want you and that gang to be here. I answered by saying, Shorty, you know what? You got no call to be playing policeman with us. And if you keep on trying to be the fuzz, you'll wish you minded your own business instead of sticking your head someplace where it doesn't belong. Walking away from me, he said, we'll see about that, Charlie. You might tell some of those kids what to do, but not me. I know how to handle you.
It's kind of a silly thing for Charles to say, because at the end of the day, George is selling the ranch, and whoever the new owners are, Charles is not going to have any sway over that. So he can threaten George all he wants, but George really doesn't have any control over that.
And not only that, he was planning to leave to begin with. That was the plan for the last 4 months, was they were trying to figure out a way to all pack up and leave the ranch to begin with. So why are you mad?
Why you mad, bro? Other members of the family shared their suspicions due to the fact that Shea had badmouthed Charles a fair bit during the short time that he had just spent locked up.
Now, he says that Shea was bad-mouthing him, but the reality of it is that he was basically just trying to get the others to cut ties with Charles Manson, and he was telling them, if you don't cut ties with this guy, you're going to end up in jail, which was a pretty valid point.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately for him, all of this would result in his death. The story about what actually happened to him has changed considerably over the years, but what we do know is that the end result would be Charles Manson, Steve Grogan, and Bruce Davis being convicted for his murder. However, Bill Vance and Tex Watson were also present. Most of those involved have agreed that Tex was the one who delivered the killing blow.
His body would not be discovered for nearly a decade. It was only found because Steve Grogan finally agreed to draw a map for the investigators so that they could locate him.
Interesting little tidbit. When talking about this in his book, Charles Manson refers to himself as a satanic Pied Piper.
And honestly, after our Pied Piper series, I could see it because I can imagine him in the colorful little outfit.
I think Charles wishes he was like the Pied Piper of lore, but he was not.
No.
Back at the ranch, things were looking more bleak than ever. Police had confiscated a number of things, including 4 dune buggies, TVs, radios, and guns. The family members were absolutely livid to see their belongings being taken away from them.
Which is ironic, considering most of their stuff was stolen to begin with.
The final arrest finally happened on October 12th, 1969. With the ranch totally surrounded, Charles decided to hide in a small cabinet. A number of officers passed by him due to the fact that none of them thought a grown man could fit into such a small... I guess being 5'5" helps when you're trying to hide in a cupboard.
Right.
Oh my god. He was eventually given up when a small tuft of his hair was seen sticking out. If this wasn't so sad and gruesome,
right, it'd be hilarious.
It would be freaking hilarious. At the time of his final arrest, Charles thought that they would be released once again, but this time he could not have been more wrong.
Numerous members of the family told the police what had happened, and this included Kitty Lutzinger and Little Paul.
Someone who really talked a lot straight off the bat was none other than Miss Susan Atkins. In fact, through her attorneys, she sold a story to the press titled, and I quote, 2 Nights of Murder.
It's a bit of an odd read with a really bizarre ending, but you can find it online if you're interested. We're also going to share it on our Patreon for those of you on there. But it's weird because they basically end, she's talking about these murders and she mentions really horrific stuff. And the very last sentence is like, all right, I'm going to go eat some ice cream, vanilla ice cream. It's awesome.
I mean, you've talked about before how sometimes it's difficult to like wrap up an episode.
Yeah.
But you've never wrapped it up by being like, alrighty, guys, nice talking to you. We're going for ice cream.
I mean, we should.
Maybe. Take a page out of Susan's book. Wait, isn't Susan Sexy Sadie as well?
She sure is.
Sexy Sadie going for ice cream.
Sadie, I was going to say that.
Oh my god. That December, Charles Manson was formally charged in relation to the Tate-LaBianca murders. When talking about Susan's story, he would say,
this girl, who had perhaps taken more drugs, created more scenes, inflicted more stab wounds, possessed the most perverted imagination, and desired more attention than anyone among our circle, told a story that projected me as love itself. Magic music maker, a devil, a guru, Jesus, and the man who ordered her and others to kill. Her story gave the news media the material for any fantasy of death and perversion that they cared to print. If I hadn't been the guy that they were talking about, I'd have laughed at every word printed. But being in the spot I was in, laughter didn't come that easy. Still, some of the stories were so ridiculous, I was amused. I was a half-assed nothing who hardly knew how to read or write, never read a book all the way through in my life, didn't know anything except jails, couldn't hold on to my wives, was a lousy pimp, got caught every time I stole, wasn't a good enough musician to hit the market, didn't know what to do with money even after I had it, and resented every aspect of family life. But a week after Sadie's story, I was a charismatic cult leader with a family, a genius who could program people into doing whatever I asked them. Shit, if there were any truth to what I was said to be capable of, I'd have been sitting in Hearst Castle with stereos in every room listening to my own platinum albums.
The way he flips back and forth to me, whenever he talks about himself, he talks... At first, you think very truthfully, I feel.
Yep.
And you're like, wow, he's remarkably self-aware. We've kind of talked about that before. But I believe that it's only to try and remove his responsibility. He's basically stepping back and saying, I wasn't a cult leader. I wasn't Jesus. I never claimed to be any of these things. They made me these things. I was just an idiot who spent too much time in jail. It's not my fault.
I wonder about it because something that he admits to is in his younger years when we talked about him playing the insane game, right?
Yeah.
Where he had to put up this crazy persona so that people wouldn't mess with him. I don't get me wrong, I do believe he was a very evil person, but I think a lot of it, all of like the craziness that came later, was he heard these stories about himself and was like, you want crazy, I'll show you crazy because that's going to get me talked about. Because
Exactly.
bare bones, all he wanted was to be famous, and this was his last shot at any kind of acknowledgement of his existence, and he got it. But he had to get it not because of his talent, not because he was smart, not because of anything like that, but because of what he did.
Exactly. Other members of the family vowed to protect Charles. Many of them pushed the fact that he was not there for the murders and that because of that, he was less guilty. Susan Atkins would later join them in this.
Bitch, make up your mind.
I can't with this woman.
I know.
Sexy Sadie, get the fuck out.
Seriously. It was around this time that some of the women in the group began sitting on the grass outside of the jail.
We aren't going to dive too deep into the trial because honestly, we're already part 5 into this series. It would probably make it 10 parts long. However, Linda Kasabian became one of the key witnesses for the prosecution in exchange for immunity. She played a huge role in the others being found guilty.
If you do want to know more about the full goings-on of the trial, I highly recommend the book Helter Skelter. It was written by Vincent Bugliosi. He was the lead prosecutor, and that's basically what the entire book is about, is the investigation and the trial. It's a long-ass book, so like Charlotte said, it would be a 10-part series if we talked about it, and it's complicated.
It is, but it is out there if you want to deep dive for yourself. The trial itself began June 15th, 1970. Oh my god, June 15th is Cody's birthday.
Oh,
a Gemini. Initially, Judge William Keene allowed Charles to act as his own attorney. Guys,
don't do that!
Never act as your own attorney. If anybody out there can give me one example of it going well, by all means send it in. But
right?
I've never seen it go well.
Right? I mean, I think about, I hate him, I think about Ted Bundy,
Ugh.
where he goes, "This is the court of Ted."
Yeah, Ted.
Okay.
Okay. Sure, buddy.
And then he gets convicted.
Exactly. This was something the judge quickly grew to regret, and before long, he reversed this decision. Charles filed for an affidavit of prejudice against him, and because of this, he was then replaced by Judge Charles Older.
On the first day of his testimony, Charles appeared with an X on his forehead as a form of protest. Over the following days, all of the women who were being charged did the same. They were soon followed by the remaining members watching the trial from the outside as a sign of solidarity. And watching the videos from around this time, we'll be posting some, is wild because the women go from, nice long hair, pretty flowing dresses, they're holding hands, they're singing like a bunch of weirdos, and then all of a sudden you just see them with shaved heads and X's on their foreheads. And like they did so much to lend to that image of him being a cult leader, because even if you watch their interviews, they're like, "We love Charlie."
It's the spaciest thing.
My God.
It's so strange. Some of those on the outside were also found attempting to scare witnesses into not testifying. This included a suspicious fire in Little Paul's van, which resulted in him sustaining some very serious burns.
On October 5th, Charles Manson leapt across the defense table and attempted to attack the judge because he was angry that the defense declined to cross-examine one of the witnesses. He was quickly tackled to the ground by bailiffs who were much larger than him, and after that, the judge began coming to work with a revolver in his robe.
Whoa. By November 16th, the prosecution had finished sharing their case with the jury. 3 days later, the defense joined them without having called a single witness. This was something that shocked and upset many members of the Manson family.
So I tried to figure out why they did that, because I thought that was really weird, and I came to the conclusion, I could be wrong, It was because if they allowed some of the women to testify, they would have lied or they would have downplayed Charles's involvement in this, and that could have potentially gained him his freedom. And I don't think anyone wanted that, even the defense. Obviously, the defense, they were like, this is a bad guy.
Well, yeah, because if they ended up perjuring themselves,
Yes.
it would have been a mistrial. The whole shit show would have started all over again, which you're absolutely right. He could have gotten out after that.
So that's the only thing I can think of. If I'm wrong, thegrimcurriculum@gmail.com.
Yeah,
Please let us know.
Please do.
But that's, I think that must be it.
It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
The following day, Charles Manson himself was allowed to testify. And this is quite dramatic, but completely true. Vincent Bugliosi was completely against this out of fear that he would use his quote-unquote hypnotic powers against the jury. This man was convinced that Charles was so powerful that he could do some hoodoo mind magic.
This is when we really see Charles Manson become Charles Manson. At one point during this time, he shaved his head and he began calling himself the devil. Many of the now famous court clips of him are from around that time.
It really became quite theatric. And I think you're onto something when you mentioned before how he would play the insane game. I think that's just what he's doing. He's like, all right, Charlie boy, you're in way over your head.
Yeah.
Start playing the insane game. It worked when you were a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it'll work now.
Because you see clips of him at the beginning of the trial. There's one in particular, I'll post it online, but he's being led by these two sheriffs and he's got the media kind of around him and he goes to the media. They're like, hello, are you, is court going well? Do you guys think this is going well? If it were my court, I wouldn't say it was going well. He kind of like laughs at them. It's super weird, but it's very like sane. And then to a few months after that, he's sitting there and he's like, I'm the devil.
We've asked this a couple of times on social media, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more towards the end of the episode, but I don't believe for a second he was insane. I think he knew what he was doing every step of the way, minus perhaps sometimes when he was off his tits on LSD, etc., etc.
Yes.
But even still, when you hear of him talk about it in his book, in his own words, he talks about it with such clarity.
Yes.
So
I've got a few theories. I mean, I think definitely some undiagnosed mental health stuff.
100%.
Whatever.
Yeah.
But I think lots of drugs, clearly, like you mentioned. I think a lot of this, though, was a situation where he just wanted to get laid and do drugs. And then suddenly, I'm not going to blame Tex Watson for this, but Tex got involved. Other people got involved. And all of a sudden, it escalated so quickly that he lost control of the situation. He wanted something out of it. And then shit just went downhill real fast.
It really did. Charles Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten were all found guilty and were originally sentenced to death on April 19th, 1971. The following year, the death sentence was ruled unconstitutional and their sentences were changed to life with the possibility of parole. His first parole hearing, one of many, would take place on November 16th, 1978.
So what happened to the rest of the Manson family? And you can cut this out, but the entire time I was working on this part of the script, I was thinking, in like the old 90s, early 2000s movies, I think Legally Blonde specifically,
Love Legally Blonde.
You know how they end and it's like the music and it shows the picture of the person. It's like blah blah went on to act in many plays.
Yes.
And that is what I pictured during this next part.
Except this is more like the end of National Lampoon's Animal House. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a classic. At the end of theirs, they do the similar thing where it's like the freeze frame, and it's like, Paul went on to do this, except none of them went on to do good things with their lives. It was like Paul became a lawyer and got divorced 3 times.
That's exactly what this is.
The family, of course, would remain in the news upon occasion. However, the Manson name was brought up again in 1975 when Lynette Squeaky Fromm, who once danced at the White House, attempted to assassinate President Gerald Ford. She was sentenced to 15 years to life, but would be released in 2009 on parole. She published a book about her life in 2018.
The last we heard, she was living with a boyfriend in a house decorated with skulls. When asked in a 2019 interview about her feelings towards Charles Manson, she said,
"Was I in love with Charlie? Yeah, I still am. I don't think you fall out of love."
Meanwhile, her boyfriend's just sitting sadly in their house of skulls. Can you imagine you're dating a chick? I mean, she's old at this point, obviously, right? But you're dating this chick, and her ex is freaking Charles Manson, who she is still obsessed with. How do you compete with that?
She says, I don't think you can fall out of love. I would have to hard disagree with
Yes,
that.
you can.
Absolutely you can. Because there are killers out there, and also just regular human beings who you married them, and then it turned out that they were kind of a shitty person.
Yeah.
You didn't know about it, because people are good at hiding these things. But the biggest red flag in the world is if you have a partner whose previous partner was Charles Manson.
Again, how do you compete? I mean, you gave her a house of skulls, dude. You did your best, but she's still gonna love him.
And don't get me wrong, I would like to clarify on further thought. There are people out there that have dated serial killers, criminals, whatever, haven't realized it, got out of there,
Yes.
dodged a bullet.
For sure, for sure.
That's not what I'm talking about. Squeaky here says that she's still in love with Charles after everything.
Yeah.
So, Squeaky.
Move on, girl. Move on.
Move the fuck on.
So, yeah, Squeaky's still kicking.
Still squeaking and still kicking. Linda Kasabian served no time for her involvement in the murders due to her testimony. She was called a star witness. After everything was said and done, she changed her name and moved, and died in January of 2023.
Mary Brunner, the mother of one of his children, also testified and received immunity. However, she did end up in prison for quite some time because she, along with other members, concocted a plan to hijack a plane, fill it with over 100 guns, and break Manson out of prison.
Okay.
And that failed attempt landed her a 20-year sentence.
Was it worth it, Mary?
Right. Mary, what are you thinking? She was released in 1977 on parole, and by all accounts, she now lives a quiet life.
Susan Atkins, aka Sexy Sadie, was denied parole 13 times before she died of brain cancer while still incarcerated in 2009. She was 61 years old.
Patricia Krenwinkel is now considered LA's longest-serving female inmate. As of 2022, she had been denied parole a total of 15 times due to her likelihood of reoffending. The current governor does not want her to get out, and every time she applies, he blocks it, and he fully admits he's going to continue to do that.
There's probably more nuance to this. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and say there is more nuance to this. But I think if you've applied for parole more than 10 times and been denied, I don't think you get to apply anymore.
There's got to be a limit.
You're wasting, first of all, you're wasting time and taxpayers' money. And not only that is every time it comes up, you re-traumatize the family and friends of the victims.
Yeah, absolutely.
It brings it up. It sensationalizes it. Obviously, we're still talking about it to this day, but the amount of hurt you caused in the first place, and then each time you're ripping the Band-Aid off that wound, I don't think you should get to do that.
No, I completely agree with you.
And then there's Tex Watson.
Oh, Tex.
Oh, we've talked a lot about him and what he's up to, so we won't spend too much more time on him because y'all know how we feel at this point. I think the words I've used many times were fucking asshole.
Yep.
Tex managed to father not one, not two, not even three, but 4 children while in prison. He has earned a degree in business management and has more podcast episodes than us, and he's an ordained minister. He has been, speaking of parole, he has been denied parole 18 times. Again, stop asking, Tex. You're going to die in there.
And he just keeps giving interviews. The man won't shut up.
Oh my God. Zip his lips and throw away the key.
Bobby Beausoleil has been denied parole 20 times.
My God, guys.
Despite the California Parole Board actually recommending his release. I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting.
I think it's because, again, it's the same governor. And I think this governor is just like, I'm not letting more of these guys out.
Good for him. I don't know what the particular governor's thoughts and beliefs are on other matters, but I'm glad he's not letting these guys out. Except, and we talked about her a little while ago, Miss Leslie Van Houten. She was in the news. She was released from prison on July 11th, 2023, after spending a whopping 53 years behind bars. Her release was called Ethically and Morally Wrong by the daughter of Leno LaBianca.
The sister of Sharon Tate, Deborah Tate, appeared at all of her parole hearings in protest of her ever seeing freedom, which is what you just mentioned with the re-traumatization. About the murders, she would say,
I prayed until I was gritting my teeth that in every kiss or every smile or every pleasurable action that she may have had during freedom, she gets a flashback of the screams, the grunts, the blood. Agreed.
that's fair.
I don't think you get to tiptoe through the rest of your life not thinking about what you did.
And Deborah Tate's life was, I mean, obviously she lost her sister in a tragic way, but her life was ruined because their father, he went crazy after all of this, rightfully so.
Yeah.
He spent all of his time and all of his money and everything into fighting this case and making sure that they didn't get released. Her, like, university fund was used for this, so because of that, she, like, had to, you know, figure that out on her own.
So not only did they take away Sharon Tate and her daughter or son's life that day, they ruined the entire family.
Absolutely. Yep. And she's out.
She is out. Of course, we cannot forget about Charlie Boy himself.
Charles came around the news once again in the 1980s when he gave 4 interviews. Many of the videos that we see of him now are from that time. If you've seen them on our socials, you'll know that they get a little wacky.
In 1984, a fellow inmate poured paint thinner on him and set him on fire after Charles verbally threatened him. After this, he spent a fair amount of time in protective custody.
He sustained burns to like 20% of his body, like 3rd-degree burns.
I can't say I feel any pity or sympathy for him whatsoever.
In the late 90s, he was caught trafficking drugs and was moved once again. And by 1997, he stopped attending his parole hearings, which to me is very interesting because all of the others, they're like, oh, 20th time's the charm, let's keep it going. And Charles was like, after 1997, he's like, yeah, I'm not getting out.
I wonder if the Manson family members who had championed him so hard during his trial, if when they heard, or if they even heard about him not bothering with parole anymore, I wonder if they were upset about that.
I wonder too.
Because they put a lot of time
Yeah.
and effort
Oh, they
into
did.
supporting him, obviously, and then for him to just be like, I don't really care anymore.
But he loved jail.
Well,
even though he's getting set on fire, jail is what he knows, and he admits it time and time again. That is what he was trained for. That is what he grew up in, and he knew jail.
I guess so. In 2013, he announced to the world that he was bisexual, saying,
sex to me is like going to the toilet. Whether it's a girl or not, it doesn't matter. I don't play that girl guy shit. I'm not hung up on that game.
I'm glad it took you so long to come to that conclusion when we kind of saw that in episode 1.
I thought that was an interesting thing. I was like, he had to do it.
I guess prison gives you time to contemplate a lot of things, including your sexuality.
I guess so.
The following year, he announced that he, at the whopping age of 80, was going to marry 26-year-old Afton Elaine Burton, who he nicknamed Star.
And I think all of you should look up a picture of her because she's very pretty. I'll give her that. She is very interesting looking because she looks like you took one of the Manson girls from the 60s and the 70s and you plopped her into today's age.
Whoa.
She has very much that. She speaks the same way. She looks the same way. She's got like that just kind of like weird hippie kind of vibe to her, which I thought was interesting. And I wonder if he kind of like led towards kind of creating that with her. But it just struck me as odd because you see her, she really, really reminds me of Susan Atkins a lot.
Oh, that's a scary thought. The thought of 2 Susan Atkins in this world is very sobering.
And the name Afton.
Afton. It is an unusual first name, but this is where it gets even grosser because she had been writing to him for 9 years prior, and they were 26 when they finally kind of got together, so you can do the math there. She was running websites that talked about him being innocent. Their plans to marry were squashed when she began visiting him with a guy named Craig. Oh, Craig.
Oh, Craig.
Things only got worse when Charles found out that her and Craig had plans to tour the country with his corpse after he died and charge people to look at it. Yeah, I mean, fair enough, Charles. I wouldn't be happy at that prospect either.
He's like, oh, a young lady wants to date me. Oh, it's for my body and not in the fun way?
Who is this? Craig?
Who the fuck is Craig?
Who the fuck is Craig?
Charles Manson died on November 19th, 2017, after a battle with colon cancer. His body was released to his grandson, who we talked about in part 2, and he was later cremated.
We'll end off talking about him with his final words from his book.
So for you people who are filled with the fear that I might someday be released, breathe easy. I don't see it happening. And for you people who are victims of all the hype that portrays me as a charismatic cult leader, guru, lover, Pied Piper, or another Jesus, I want you to know I've got everything in the world and beyond right here. My eyes are cameras. My mind is tuned to more television channels than exist in your world, and it suffers no censorship. Through it, I have a world and the universe as my own. So save your sympathy and know that only a body is in prison. At my will, I walk your streets, and I am right there among you.
I don't think he had the ability, but whatever helped him sleep at night.
Oh, yeah.
That brings us to the end of the life and crimes of Charles Manson and the infamous Manson family.
However, next week we're going to do a special little bonus episode for you all.
We are. We're going to be discussing some conspiracy theories regarding Charlie Boy. A lot of people think he was a CIA plant, or maybe he was involved in MK Ultra experiments, or was he just a way to end the hippie movement?
We are going to be exploring that and more next week with our farewell to our largest series yet. So get your tinfoil hats. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, get your tinfoil hats out, buckle down, buckle up, strap in or strap on, as my good friend says, and we hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I think it's a little bit of a, I don't want to say lighthearted because it's definitely not lighthearted, but it's an interesting way to end everything.
Yes, it's probably going to be the least dark episode of this series so far.
Yes, I'm not going to need like a giant hug when we're done after that one.
And I still feel like I need a giant hug after this one.
Oh my goodness, me too.
All right, we are at that point in the episode where we thank our beautiful, gorgeous, intelligent, wonderful, lively patrons over on Patreon. We have a few tiers over there. You can support us for as little as $3 Canadian a month, and we have a lot of goodies. Every episode from 100 onwards has a video with our beautiful, lovely faces. So if you'd like to see more of us in the flesh, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thegrimcurriculum.
It's a fun time. We
It
post
is.
like behind the scenes stuff, videos, pictures, all sorts of goodies on there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so a giant thank you to Atlantean Jedi, Bob, Brian, Hillary, Judy, Kevinus Musicus, Lisa, Mayhem Mudkip, and a special shout out to our newest patron,
Hello.
Steven Centauri. And I hear he's a real handsome fella.
Oh, I've heard he's a nice guy.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for your support, guys. Y'all are the Titty City. We love you. It means the absolute world to us. And if you're not supporting us on Patreon, first of all, judging you. Just
Rude.
kidding. Just kidding.
Kidding.
But you can support us for free by sharing our content, commenting on our stuff, pleasing those algorithm gods. It all helps, and we love hearing from you guys.
We really do. We've been getting some emails. We've been getting a lot of love on all the platforms.
Yeah.
Like we mentioned, we kind of changed up how we're doing our social media. And we really, really, really appreciate all the love. We do.
Absolutely, we do. There's a lot of new folks that seem to be joining us every day, and it's really nice to see. So welcome, welcome if you're new. Welcome, welcome if you're old, and we love all of y'all.
Thank you all so much for listening. This has been
The Grim Curriculum.
All right, I've got an interesting fact. So for some reason, all of my feeds have been filled with like hamster videos lately.
Oh, I love hamsters.
Yeah, so I thought I'd bring you a hamster fact today.
I will say I'm bracing myself slightly because everyone I've ever talked to that's had a pet hamster has had it die in the most traumatic way you can think of.
They're tricky little buggers, but mine isn't too bad. It's not too bad.
Okay, I'm ready.
My fact is hamsters are banned in Hawaii.
Whoa!
The reason for it is because they have a very high reproductive rate.
They do.
And Hawaii's climate is similar to their native habitat. So because of that, they're illegal because they could very easily break out and establish wild colonies and completely mess everything up over there.
Ooh, we don't want rampaging hamsters in Hawaii.
I'd watch that movie though.
So would I.
Bye.